Today, we just have a couple quick announcements from my end, and then we're going to go through announcement from one of our team members as well, and then dive into questions you may have. So I just want to remind everyone of our different mechanisms that we have for questions. We have this weekly series from 8 to 9 a.m. every week for those who are in US and EMEA to be able to come in, answer questions, be able to dive into different items you may have. And then we do have a monthly session for APAC as well on the second Wednesday of each month from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. So if you have individuals who may be in a different time zone who are interested in joining, feel free to share this out with them. And then I just want to remind everyone that we have a number of updates in our docs. We have a number of things that'll be coming shortly as well. But if you haven't had a chance to go and see the updates, we've gone into different concept areas and others as well. We recommend you take a look. And then for a couple of announcements and blogs that we have out, we have a recent model as a service available for Semantic Kernel, which goes through all the different pieces for connectors and dives into that in our blog as well. And then we do have an update around planners. So there's a future of planners from Matthew that goes into how we're thinking about planners, the reframing, and some of the work ahead. And then it also leads into our presentation today around automatic function calling and some of the changes that we're seeing as well. And so what I'll go ahead and do is hand it over to Dimitro to dive into automatic function calling, walk through the blog a bit in detail, and then dive into any questions you may have as well. Dimitri, I'll go and hand it over to you.
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen, and please let me know if you can see it.
Perfect. I can see it now. Can others see it as well?
Yep. Okay, good. Yeah,
Perfect.
so today we are going to talk about function calling stepwise planner and what would be the next steps for this part of functionality. So I want to start with the blog post from Matthew about the future of planners in Semantic Kernel. I highly encourage to check this blog post because it describes an information like what were the previous version of planners that we started, why we decided to improve them, and what would be our next steps for the planning functionality. But today, we want to talk about specifically about function calling stepwise planner. So just to put a little bit more context, when we introduced initial version of stepwise planner, as far as I remember back then, function calling API was not available yet. So for the planning capabilities, we created this prompt that basically instructs the model how to behave, which functions to call, and so on. Later, when the function calling API was introduced, we decided to take leverage of it because the planning process, as soon as you want to generate any plan, it always involves the invocation of functions that basically created that plan, right? So we try to improve our prompt a little bit. As you can see here, the second version of stepwise planner has more easier prompt for the model. It also contains like the specific settings, and it also contains this step prompt, which basically reminds the model that the model is in the process of helping the user to fulfill the request. But basically, this functionality, and the function calling stepwise planner, it's already based on the function calling API, but it has this additional prompt that basically control the model specifically how to behave on each step. And it performed really well back then, but then we realized that the models become better, the function calling API becomes better. So we try to experiment with the vanilla function calling and see if, for example, if the user has some goal and user import all of the plugins into kernel, is it possible to achieve that goal by using just simple function calling without additional prompts? And the results of these experimentations, they were really good. And basically, we released this another blog post which shows how to migrate from function calling stepwise planner to vanilla function calling. And we tried to present like simple scenarios, like we have two plugins, time plugin, which returns current time, and then weather plugin, which returns some, hard-coded weather for a specific city. And then we initialize the kernel with GPT-4 model. We import two plugins into kernel, and then we presented how the planning process looks at the moment with function calling stepwise planner, and then how it will look like when using just vanilla function calling. So for the old approach, we have our function calling stepwise planner, we initialize it, and then we try to execute the plan. We pass the kernel with imported plugins, and then we define our goal. Check current UTC time and return current weather in Boston City. And then if we output the result, we'll be able to see that the current time is this, and the weather in Boston is this one. And then the most important thing here is to compare the results in terms of performance, token usage. So here we are able to see that with using function calling stepwise planner with two plugins and defined goal, in this scenario, we will spend around 1,380 tokens, and we will have our result. So when we use new approach with automatic function calling, basically the code syntax is a little bit different. So in this case, we don't need to use any kind of planner object. We just use kernel object. We need to define prompt execution settings when we basically enable auto invocation. This is important for function calling scenario. And then we just say kernel.invoke prompt, and our prompt will be our goal. Check current time and return current weather in Boston City. And we also want to pass execution settings. So, and as you can see here, the result is pretty much the same. So it says like the current UTC time is this one and the weather is this one. And of course, like this is a simple scenario, right? Two plugins, but we also did an experimentation with more plugins, like, 5 plugins. And, the results are pretty good. And with the automatic function calling with the same scenario, we will spend approximately 240 tokens, which is really, really good performance comparing to function calling stepwise planner. So the result provided by two approaches are the same, but the amount of tokens is different because in vanilla function calling, we do not use these prompts to remind the model to, proceed with the plan to fulfill the request, because this kind of additional prompt is not needed because the models are more advanced. The function calling functionality is already optimized, which works really well. And then, the article also contains some information how to get a generated plan with automatic function calling. This is useful when you want to store the plan, you want to re-execute it later. This can also save you the amount of tokens spent in case you have the same workflow you want to re-execute. And also we provided additional links to our examples. So we have an example in our repository that basically lists all of the concepts of automatic function calling planning. So we have side-by-side comparison with function calling stepwise planner in order so you can see how the syntax is different. And I have to say that, it's a little bit different, but in terms of like the amount of code, it's just a couple of lines in both approaches. So the migration should not be a problem. And then we also provided a way how to execute the plan in different options. You can use kernel directly, or you can use iChat completion service in case you want to get access to chat history, because in both cases, chat history contains the generated plan. In case of function calling, stepwise planner and automatic function calling, chat history is the main object how you want to interact with the generated plan. We also have an example how to enable and have a telemetry for plan generation and execution. So for example, we execute our goal, we enable automatic function calling, we execute our goal, and then in the logs, we'll be able to see the planning process. So we have our tokens used for each step. We have our functions called, and you will be able to see the result of each function, what arguments were passed, and then the final result of the entire plan execution. We also have an example of plan caching. As I said previously, this is useful for reusability. If you don't want to spend a lot of tokens to regenerate the same plane, the same plan every time, you can just cache it and then reuse it, re-execute it later. We have an example for this, and we also have an example how to use semantic kernel filters to control plan execution. So, for example, we have this plan execution filters that says that, for example, if we have function that has a name get weather for city, and then if the city name is specifically Boston, then we want to return another predefined or default result. So this basically, the filtering allows to have more control over plan execution, override the result, maybe add additional logging, additional telemetry into your planning execution. So we also have an example for this. And then the other example, it's basically the separate ASP.NET application that shows how to migrate from function calling stepwise planner to the vanilla function calling functionality with all of the syntax for scenarios like plan generation, new plan execution, and then existing plan execution in case you store plan somewhere in a file or in cache or in database, and then you want to re-execute it. We have a syntax example how to do that. And this ASP.NET application has two controllers. So basically, first controller has some actions how to generate plan, execute new plan, execute existing plan with function calling stepwise planner, basically the old approach. And then we have the same use cases for vanilla function calling and the new approach, the new recommended approach. So basically some example how you would like to use the automatic function calling in real applications. And then if you want to go to the repository and maybe test this application, debug it, see how it works, you can use this HTTP file, which basically allows you to trigger those ASP.NET controller actions and then debug the functionality, see what are the differences, maybe observe the amount of tokens used, and etc. So yeah, I highly encourage you to check both articles, and if in case you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Perfect. Thanks, Tamisha. Really appreciate you walking through that in detail. I'm not seeing anything in chat, but would love if people do have questions. If you want to go ahead and come off of mute, we'd love to dive into them. Great. I'm seeing a couple of hands. I see. Do you want to go and start off first?
Yeah. Hi. So, I think I might have asked this maybe a few weeks ago, but I kind of wanted to just check in. So, one thing I have to do one way or another is implement our own client. We're using just like our own kind of custom LLM setup. So one way or another, I need to implement my own client. Are there like I've been referencing heavily existing implementations for clients, but are there any like maybe LLM agnostic guidelines, or are there plans to provide that, or did I just miss any documentation around it?
Yeah, so I can jump into this. What the industry has kind of rallied around is using the same API surface as OpenAI. So as long as your client kind of mimics the same API surface for chat completion, you should be good to go. In our docs, let me just pull that up real quick. I can share a link. In our docs, I can share my screen. In our docs, whether you're C# or Python, and you're in the chat completions page, we have all the standard kind of connectors. But if you're building your own client or using another client like LLM Studio or Olama. Basically, you can come in here, use the OpenAI chat completion connector, because again, kind of the industry is moving to their API surface. And the only difference is you'd be adding this new endpoint property so that you can point to your particular client. And as long as your client is using the exact same API, you're good to go.
I see. Okay. Unfortunately, this API does not follow that standard. There are some differences.
No.
So I am implementing my own client class. Mainly my question just had to do with, it seems like there's certain classes that are LLM agnostic, like I think chat message content. But then for my own specific API, I need to implement a flavor of like, my LLM name chat message. And I have to convert between the two. So it feels like there is some sort of concept of language as not agnostic classes. But I was struggling to figure out what the recommended approach is for translating those two. I know it's very specific, but yeah, I was just wondering if you had any documentation on that.
Yeah, so I was gonna have documentation right now. I will share kind of what we're doing with like the Azure OpenAI SDK. So if we go to Semantic Kernel and we go into .NET land, source abstractions. Okay. So we have these like core abstractions that we believe, especially in, are you .NET or Python?
.NET.
So in .NET land, these are basically the core abstractions that we're going to be baking into .NET 9. And so the conversations that we're having with the Azure OpenAI SDK team is, as part of their SDK, they should be inheriting from chat message, image content, all of these different things, right? And so when you do integrate this with Semantic Kernel, right now we are doing what you're trying to do, which is doing this translation, this dance between their types to our types. In the future, they're just going to adopt our types so that that's seamless, right? So like my guidance to you is, if possible, instead of like having your own types that then translate, because that's what our connectors do today. You can take a look at all of our AI connectors and see how they're implemented. But if you can use our types just out of the box, it's going to save you a lot of heartache.
Okay, understood. But none of the connectors right now do that, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. Right now, because each one of them basically connects to an SDK that uses different types. Actually, I guess a question for the team. Do we have any connectors that just use REST APIs that we immediately go to, our types? Does anyone know?
In terms of AI connectors, I don't think so. I think probably Google connector may be the case. But as far as I remember, there were some discussions to transition that to the Google SDK, but I'm not sure if that's ready yet. So
okay, so yeah, maybe not. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I've just been referencing the existing connectors to build it. But yeah, I noticed those two different classes, so I was just wondering. But thank you.
Great.
Perfect. Thanks for the question. Omkar, do you want to go ahead and come off of mute?
Yes. Hi, team. Thanks, Dimitro, for that quick introduction, the blog post as well. Just in time for me, because I was just kind of working on that this past week. So I had a couple of questions on that. And so first question is regarding this aspect of function calling. And I think it's also evident from one of the diagrams that we have on the semantic kernel documents, wherein once a user query goes in, and if my tool call behavior is set to auto invoke, LLM can choose to do two. I mean, it's not either or, maybe it could do both, which is either invoke a tool or send a text response back, or actually do both. That's my understanding. Now, the thing that I'm really struggling with is, so let's say I have a function that I've defined for function calling, which is a native function, which does not return anything. So it's of type void. Now, when I do function calling on that, so essentially think of it as turn the lights on function. The behavior that I'm seeing is if I send a message to LLM saying turn on the lights, it rightly calls that function, but then it also sends me back a response saying the lights are now turned on. So, so that extra message that the LLM sends me is something that I don't want. Is there a way I could ignore that? Because in a case where maybe the function also takes another input which says which light do you want to turn on or off, and then if I say turn on the lights, it could ask me a clarifying question, which is what lights do you want to turn on, which is the one of the input arguments to the function. So for me, one thing that I'm struggling with is when I get back a text response from LLM, I don't know if it's asking me a clarifying question to then do a function call, or if it's just replying with plain old text. And for me, it would be nice in cases where it decides to do a function call for a void return type native function, it does not return any text back to me. Is there something that I could do to make that happen?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good question. So just a little bit more context in order to understand like how the function calling in semantic kernel works, right? So you send a request, turn on the light, right? And you basically imported the light plugin, and then you enable auto function calling. So in function calling scenario, basically there is a loop, right? And the first operation of that loop is to send a request to LLM. So LLM will be able to respond like what's to do next, right? So as we said, it, for example, based on different prompt, it may say, it may return some text result, right? Or it may return some functions to call. So, in case we, in semantic kernel, we receive text result, we just return it immediately back to you. In case we receive some functions to call, we basically go through each function and then we execute it. Now, when we execute each function, we take the result of each function and we add this result to the chat history. And then we take the chat history and we send it back to LLM. So LLM will be able to understand, does it need to call another additional functions, or the request is already fulfilled and we need to return text result. So this is what is happening. In your case, when the function is void, basically the result is empty. So the model assumes that nothing happened and your function executed successfully. For example, when your functions throw an exception, we will pass that exception to model, so the model will return text result nicely formatted that something wrong happened during your function invocation. So your request is basically you want to still execute that function, which returns basically nothing returns, just void, right? But you don't want to LLM to respond with the text. You just want the result back. So in this case, what you can do, we have the concept of auto function invocation filter. So this is the filter that is executed when the function is executed in the context of automatic function calling. And here you can have the information like what function is called, the chat history, the function calls which is going to be performed during your request. And then there's this flag that says terminate. And in case in your filter, if you set that flag to true, what is going to happen in the function calling loop, we are not going to send the last request to LLM in order to get that text result. So if you set context terminate to true, what is going to happen? Your function will be invoked, and then the result of that function will be returned immediately to you. So you won't perform this last request to LLM in order to get that text result to LLM. Does it help? Can it fulfill your scenario?
Yes, no, I love this. This is perfect. This is exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So this is wonderful. One other quick question. I noticed that the tool call options that we have, OpenAI has another option which is required, and I don't see that on our tool call options list. Or maybe I just have an older version. Do we have an all option? I know we have auto invoke. I know we have enabled kernel functions. I don't see required anywhere.
Yeah, we have required function as well. Although it's not like an option, it's basically a static method. So you have to say tool call behavior dot require function, and you need to specify what function you want to call.
No, I
The
think
only limitation here is that it accepts only one function. As far as I
right.
know, the OpenAI API allows you to specify multiple functions, but as far as I know, multiple functions will be available in the new OpenAI connector we are going to introduce.
Yeah, maybe let me clarify more. So what I mean is the tool choice options that we have. So the OpenAI has this tool choice option, which is called required. What it does, it always forces LLM to make a function call. So LLM never essentially returns any text back to you. And I think
Yeah.
which is different from saying execute this function or execute a given list of functions. I think that's one thing that I'm also looking for.
So
But
basically,
yeah, I think we named it something different. Just like, oh no, so I'm looking at tool call behavior, and there's something called required function.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So basically, it's forcing LLM to call that specific function.
But this is different from I think require function. This is forcing LLM to always call functions, but not really specifying any specific function. So
So
um,
we have enable functions. So
yes,
enable functions basically will share the functions with the model, but the semantic kernel won't execute that function. So it's not
yes,
like out of invocation. So LLM may return your list of function calls, but you will be able to call them on your side. So this is enable functions. So auto invoke functions, basically your functions will be executed. And then require functions, it's basically you say, hey LLM, I want to execute that function. And that's it.
okay. Maybe I can send something in the chat, but I think it's a little different from what we have here. So
Okay.
if you go to this tool choice class that we have, right? I think there should be a tool choice or tool options. A tool called behavior, sorry. Tool called behavior class.
Yeah, tool called behavior.
and what you see here is tool call behavior required, whatever it's called. It's being passed in a function, and so what we do is whatever function is passed in, and that so yeah, function and auto invoke. We will force the AI to call that one and do the slot filling. And then behind the scenes, we call the required attribute inside the OpenAI API. Are you
I
not
see.
getting that behavior, or that
Um,
might be a
uh,
bug?
maybe I think there's maybe I understood it wrong. So let me just go back and read it again. But the way I understood that was with tool choice, you now get three options. The default behavior is um, the default behavior is LLM can choose to make a function call or can return back a text response. If you and I think if you set it to required, LLM always returns back with a function call. But
Correct.
you never read, yeah, so it's different from saying a required function call this specific function and saying LLM always call functions. Let me just look if I can find that.
Yeah. Because like in the OpenAI API, the required function or the required thing is like you pass in a single function and it is forcing the LM to call that. Just
I
double
see.
check.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I can just put the doc link in the chat, but I'll pass it to if anyone else if they have more questions. Yeah. But thank you so much. This was so helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks for diving into it. Really appreciate it. Other questions folks may have, feel free to come off of mute. So I'm not seeing anything in chat. We can give it a few more minutes in case anyone else is coming off of mute before we drop off early. But yeah, if there are any other questions, we'd love to hear from you. If you do have anything that you're working on, any sort of issues that you're encountering, we'd love to dive in.
So I pulled up real quick. So I pulled up the OpenAI docs on tool choice. So I think where the confusion might be is previously the required property, you could only provide one tool, and it forced the LM to call that one tool. There was an enhancement, I don't know, a couple months ago or maybe a month ago, where they changed it so that you could provide multiple tools. And you say, hey, I'm forcing you to make a tool call, but here's all the options. What Dimitri was just showing, what's currently implemented in tool call is just one function. And as part of the work to move to the updated Azure OpenAI SDK, we're broadening that out to multiple tools. And I think that might be where you're wanting multiple tool selection, but requiring it to call one of those. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I just sent this. Sorry, I just sent this other link I found in the chat. And based on what's described there, the way I read it is if you set tool choice to required, the model will determine which functions are relevant and call them automatically. So there's no list per se that you provide during that request.
So in the raw OpenAI APIs, you always have to provide in that body your list of tools.
Right.
In Semantic Kernel, you optionally cannot.
Right.
Right. So when we start supporting more than one tool, we will do what you describe, and we'll just send all this stuff in the kernel. Because today we only support one tool, if there's multiple functions in the kernel, which there always is, you have to tell us, and that's why you saw that as a required parameter. But that should be changing probably in the next week or so as we update to the new SDK.
Got it. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, the main difference is, these things changed. What the required attribute did, it changed at some point.
Yeah.
Great. I'm seeing in chat there's an interesting question from Brett. Couldn't you work around this by making the one required function a native function with the prompt to then select from options and then manually invoke that selection natively? Is that an option?
I guess you could do that. The value of having multiple options, multiple functions, and saying LLM, please pick one, like you have to pick one, is each function might have different required inputs. If you just have one function, it's only going to have a single set of inputs. So the LLM might not provide all of the information that's necessary for that internal logic. If you say, hey, I have a get lights and a turn lights functions, you must call one of them. Clearly, they have different inputs, and depending on which one the LLM chooses, they have to provide the right inputs.
If I'm not seeing anything else in chat, anyone else have questions that they want to come off of mute and ask? We'd love to hear from you. If not, we'll stay on for a minute or two more, but want to thank everyone for joining this week's office hours.
Thank you so much, team. This was super helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a question about integration with Copilot Studio. Can you guys hear me?
Oh yeah, hey Jake.
All right, thanks. We've created a demo using Semantic Kernel in our own little chatbot, and that's really good. But a lot of people are asking to use Copilot. A lot of our corporate customers would like to have like an action within Copilot Studio where they could select our Semantic Kernel instance of what it's doing, reaching out to our data set and responding with answers. Is there some sort of integration with Copilot Studio or Copilot? Is there an easy way to follow things?
Yeah, the guidance that we give folks today, because the way the way Copilot Studio works is you can define additional plugins. And my understanding is you like upload an open API spec so it can talk to your service. Semantic Kernel doesn't have a very opinionated way of how you like wrap it up in a like an ASP.NET service or an API or what have you. So if you do have some semantic kernel logic that you want Copilot SDK to call, you would have to wrap that up in some sort of API and then feed that into Copilot Studio. I guess the nice thing is you would have to provide that API once, generate that Swagger file once, and then for all of your clients, they could then load that into their Copilot Studio.
Right. And then I saw something about you need so all this data resides on their corporate server. So you need some sort of gateway, if it's, from my understanding, so Azure Copilot Studio could connect to that service, or
so your customers might have that requirement, and then you would have to figure out how to. In this case, we're now just in standard app development practices of if it has to be live in their world, you'd probably create a solution that you deploy into their own Azure tenant, and then you would have to take that service's Swagger file and import that into Copilot Studio. So it's a little bit more work because you're not just dealing with one endpoint; you're having to deal with one per customer. But the same process would ultimately pan out.
All right. Are there any plans to have it more integrated with Copilot Studio? Or Copilots in general? I guess there's lots of different instances of what Copilots are, but.
I guess so Semantic Kernel will continue staying out of the business of like, oh, I click on this button, now I have this API, because we pride ourselves on just being an SDK, in some parts more frameworky with like the agent stuff that we have. But there is kind of an overarching Microsoft effort of how do we connect these different pieces within Microsoft in a more elegant fashion. And so I would suspect over time there will be solutions out there in Microsoft that basically wrap semantic kernel in a API. And then at that point, having like a really easy button of adding that as a skill or plugin inside of something like Copilot Studio.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Other questions folks may have? Omkar, love to hear from you.
Yeah, sorry, it's me again.
Oh, no
So
worries.
I know GPT-4o Mini just came up recently, so it's pretty new. But it also introduced this idea of enhanced instruction hierarchy. Are there any plans to maybe support that natively in semantic kernel?
Yes, I guess any new feature we get it implemented as quick as we can. If we get a little bit delayed on this, it's because we're trying to wrap up the Azure OpenAI SDK kind of migration work. My hope is that wraps up this week or maybe into next week, and then after that we can start adding any enhancements that come from something like 4.0 Mini.
Gotcha. Yeah, really looking forward to that. Thanks.
I do wonder, I don't know if we have an issue open for that yet. So if you don't mind creating an issue for us so that we can track it, that'd be great. Otherwise, I can probably get to it later today.
Absolutely, yeah, will do.
Great, thank you. Any other questions folks have? If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks everyone for joining this week's office hours.
Cheers, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.